Welcome everybody. This is my review of the A7S III and I love this camera. That's it, end of video. Seriously though, I got this camera a few months ago and I'm in love. I really like this camera. As some of you know, I own the Red Helium 8K, and so I needed a B camera, a camera I can put on a gimbal, something smaller that took less logistical craziness, and something I could travel with. And so this was the perfect camera. I used to have the A7S II, so naturally I've wanted this camera for a very long time. We're not gonna dig into every single piece of the menu. We're just gonna see what the camera can do, show you some test footage, give you some thoughts, and hopefully you learn something. Now stay tuned guys and wait till the end of the video. I always have a gift or a surprise, so don't miss out on that. First things first, the price. This camera is $34.99, 5, 6, something like that. And that's not bad considering what it can do, but to some people, that's a lot of money. And that's a big investment into a camera. And I wouldn't say that everybody needs this camera, especially if you're starting out. Again, like I said before, it's not always just about the gear and the tool, it's about the story and what are you putting in front of the camera. I think that people forget that those couple things are the most important part of what we do, not just so much what we shoot on. Frame rates, frame rates, frame rates, frame rates, frame rates, frame rates. So obviously this camera shoots 4K 24, nothing new, but it's 10-bit, 422. It looks great, that's what we're shooting in right now. And now it shoots 4K 60, which obviously for all of us, we're super excited about that. There was a couple cameras prior that did shoot 4K 60, I think like the GH5. I feel like there's one more, but I'm forgetting, so somebody smarter than me can leave it in the comments. But I think for the most part, this is new to people, and everyone's super excited. I'm super excited. I will say, I think the 4K 60 on this looks much better than any of the other DSLRs I've seen. And for my very favorite part about this camera, 4K 120.
I came from the mud, there's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree, there's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon.
I am blown away by what this 4K 20 looks like. I'm used to 4K 120 with my Red Helium, but the thing is I have to go from 8K to 4K and it does a double crop. So if I'm using a 50mm lens, now I crop into 100mm to be able to get that 120. With this camera, there's a slight crop, but barely noticeable, and the image is incredible. I am in love. I am very impressed. I thought at first it was just kind of like a stat packer, where they were just like, yeah, this camera can do 4K 120, but is it gonna be usable? Is it practical? And as you can see, it is. The image does not fall apart when you try to color correct it. There's no noise, it's just incredible. To be honest, we took my Red Helium out this day, and I have to say, the 4K 120 on this looks better than my Red Helium. It's just such a cool tool to have in your bag to be able to use when you need it and when you want it. Now, something I feel like not a lot of people have talked about is you can also shoot 240 frames on this camera in 1080p, which is nuts. Now I can shoot 240 frames on my Red, but I have to go to 1080p, so now my 50mm turns to 150mm. Cue the epic 240 frames per second montage, please. Another cool thing about this camera, it has S&Q mode. So you can switch it to S&Q to shoot your slow motion, and then your slow motion footage will come into your project when you import it to edit already slowed down to that speed, which I think is really cool. You lose sound, so you can't record audio when you switch over to that mode, but to me that's not a huge deal. But the fact also that you can record sound as you're shooting 120 frames per second when you're not in S&Q mode is also amazing. To address the overheating, I have not experienced One problem with overheating on this camera, sorry Canon. Size and build. So this camera is a little heavier than its predecessor, the A7S II, which I like. I like a little weight in the camera because when you're shooting handheld, it just helps stabilize things. The flip out screen is awesome. Thank you, Sony, for doing that. The only thing is it doesn't tilt, which I missed that on the A7S II, but it's an amazing flip out screen, and it also just looks, the image looks so much better. The screen is so high quality. On a couple of the other Sonys, you take a photo or you take your shot and you're looking on your viewfinder and it looks doo-doo. And then you import it and it looks fine, but I wanna see exactly what I'm shooting on my screen. So thank you, Sony, for making this a lot better. The record button is in such a much better place. On the A7S II, you had to use like a toothpick on the side of the camera to get it to record. So thank you, Sony, for fixing that. The battery is the same battery from the A7 III. I love this battery. It lasts like 4 to 5 hours, I would say, when shooting photo video. On my A7S II, I think I had like 8 batteries and I used them. The cards are CF Express cards. They're expensive. I think for 80 gigs is 200 bucks. You can also use SD cards, but you don't get all the functions and the features. And in my head, I want everything this camera can do, so I went and bought the CF Express cards, and I recommend everybody else does too. A small thing I want to talk about is SLog III. Now, previous Sony models, my A7S II, it had SLog III, but it was impossible to color, and anytime you tried to get it back to your Rec 709 or put a grade on it, the image just completely fell apart. But now with this camera, SLog III looks amazing. And it's so easy to bring your image back to par or to put a grade on it. The image does not fall apart with having the 10-bit, and it looks amazing. And you're getting all that extra dynamic range when you're shooting an SLog III compared to when you're shooting on one of the other picture profiles. I think this camera is marketed at 13 stops of dynamic range, which is pretty dang good. The IBIS, the in-body stabilization. It's pretty good. It's much better than it was before in the previous cameras or I think any of the other Sonys. It's not great. It's not, I don't think maybe this is the one category I think Canon wins in or Panasonic. It's much better, don't get me wrong, but I still think that there's some work to do there on the IBIS. Autofocus, it's so good, I love it. It is a big upgrade from what we had in the last couple cameras. And my favorite part is that you can set your sensitivity settings with your autofocus. So you can set it to where it'll rack really quickly or it does a slow rack. And for me, I think that's a huge win. If you can't make this autofocus work for what you do, then I don't know, what are you doing? There's also face tracking, which is great. So like right now I'm using face tracking, so no matter what I would do, it would track my face. Now, for what everybody bought this camera for, the low light settings. For me, this is such an amazing tool of filmmaking. Like not having to have light to be able to get a shot and it be usable. I think so many times we're limited by, lighting and situations that we're in. And for most cameras, you go past 2000 ISO and your image is unusable. On this camera, it's usable all the way up to 16,000. There's dual, they don't market it as dual ISO, but that's 640 and 16,000. And it looks incredible all the way up to, I think, 16. You can use it up to 25. Once you get into that 50 range, it definitely starts to fall apart, but it's 10 times better, I think, than most cameras. Like, think of all the cool things that we can do now. Like, I can film stars. Another thing I feel like people are not talking about with this camera, unless it's in a negative way, is photography. Now, this was one of my biggest hesitations when I bought this camera was I do both, mostly video, but I do photo, and I was very hesitant because of the 12 megapixels and it not really being a dual camera and it being more video than photo. But when I started taking photos with this camera, I was very, very impressed. You can see with some of these photos, they're awesome, their color is great, and I really think this is a very good dual photo video camera. Now, if you're doing huge prints, yeah, this probably isn't the camera for you. Or if you're mainly a photographer and you do some video, this for sure isn't the camera for you. But there's nothing wrong with the photos at all. Even needing to crop in some situations, the image still holds up, and I think the photos on this camera look amazing. Guys, you don't need more than 12 megapixels. How many of you are printing massive prints on the wall? Not that many of us. Mostly it's for web, for social, and you don't need the 50, 100 megapixels cameras. Y'all nuts. So, my final thoughts. I love this camera so much. And I think it might be my favorite camera that I've ever used. I'm Ron Burgundy. Some people have asked, will it replace my Red? No, it won't replace my Red, but it is an amazing compliment to my Red. So the gift and surprise today, guys, where'd I put it? Hold on one second. Is this. My 35mm Minolta camera. Oh, I have film in here. I love this camera, but I'm gonna upgrade, so I'm gonna gift this to somebody. All you have to do is leave a comment. I'm gonna pick somebody randomly, and you're gonna be shooting 35mm in no time. So guys, get out there, start shooting some stuff. A lot of times people ask me how I got to where I'm at and what kind of tips and advice I have for them. My biggest tip is not to get the newest and greatest camera on the market. It's to take any camera and just get out there and start shooting. I think that's people's biggest downfall, is they just don't do it enough. You have to constantly be shooting, no matter what it is, whether it's a paid gig or it's a passion project. Be shooting constantly, and you're gonna get better at your craft. You're gonna meet more people who do what you do. You're gonna meet more people who need your work. Your work's gonna be out there more, and you're gonna be able to build a sustainable business, but you have to get out there and start shooting. So stop watching YouTube and go shoot. Thanks so much, guys. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. Did I just do the Shooter McGavin?